There is a story buried beneath the surface of ancient scripture, a story so rarely told that most have never even considered it. Not because it was lost, but because it was never meant to be found. When people speak of the Nephilim, they speak of giants, warriors, men of renown, monstrous beings born of rebellion. But there is a silence, a haunting absence in the ancient records. A question no one seems to ask. Where were the women? Because if the Nephilim walked the earth as giants, then they did not walk alone. Something else existed beside them, something that history chose to forget, or perhaps something that history feared to remember. Long before the floodwaters swallowed the world, the earth was not as we know it. The skies hung heavier. The air carried a strange weight, as though creation itself had been bent out of shape. It began in the days when the boundaries between heaven and earth were broken, the Watchers, beings not meant to dwell among. Men descended, not as saviors, not as guides, but as intruders. They came with knowledge that did not belong to this world, secrets of the stars, weapons of destruction. The language of hidden forces. They taught humanity things it was never meant to understand. And then they did something far worse. They took wives, not symbolically, not metaphorically. They chose women, human women, and created something new, something unnatural. The Nephilim, the giants, massive in stature, terrifying in presence, consuming everything around them. The texts describe them as devourers, not just of food, but of the earth itself. They consumed resources, animals, and eventually people. Violence became their language. Power became their identity. But again, there is something missing, because in every creation there are two sides, male and female, and yet Scripture barely whispers about the latter. It is as if the female Nephilim were erased from memory, but not completely. Fragments remain, hidden in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch and echoed faintly in forgotten traditions. Clues, scattered like bones beneath the sand. The Watchers did not simply create warriors. They created a lineage, and within that lineage, there had to be daughters. But what kind of beings would these daughters have been? Not merely reflections of their male counterparts. Something different. Something perhaps even more dangerous. Because while the male giants dominated through brute force, the female Nephilim may have operated through something far more subtle: influence, seduction, corruption of the unseen. Ancient myths across civilizations speak of towering women, not always grotesque, but often described with a terrifying beauty, a presence that drew men in only to destroy them. In Mesopotamian whispers, in scattered Greek accounts, in oral traditions passed down in fragments, there are echoes of giantesses. But they are never named clearly, never fully described, as though speaking of them directly and carried a cost. Imagine a world where these beings walked, where their presence alone could shift the atmosphere of a place, where their voices carried a weight that bent the will of men. Not just physical giants, but spiritual distorters. The Nephilim men brought destruction to the physical world. But what if the female Nephilim brought corruption to the mind, to the soul? What if they were the unseen force behind the chaos? The texts do not say this outright, but they do not deny it either, and sometimes what is not said is far more revealing. As the corruption of the earth grew, something changed. Humanity began to deteriorate, not just morally, but spiritually. The line between what was human and what was not became blurred. Violence spread like wildfire, but so did something else. An unnatural fascination, a pull toward darkness. It was not just fear, it was attraction, as though something was calling humanity deeper into its own destruction. And then the judgment came. The flood. A cleansing unlike anything the world had ever seen. Water rose from the depths and fell from the heavens. It did not come gently. It came with finality, with purpose, to erase, to reset, to end what had begun. The giants fell, the watchers were bound, the earth was washed clean, but was it? Because there is a problem, a question that lingers in the shadows. If everything was destroyed, why do the stories continue? Why do later texts still speak of giants? Why do ancient cultures across the world still tell of massive beings long after the flood? Something survived, or something returned. And if the Nephilim returned, then so did their lineage, which means the female Nephilim were not entirely erased. There are strange references in ancient genealogies, unexplained figures, women whose origins are unclear, whose influence is undeniable, figures who appear and then vanish from the narrative, leaving behind only consequences. It is possible that the female Nephilim adapted, that they did not rely on sheer size or strength, but on integration, blending, influencing from within, not ruling through force, but through subtlety. And that would explain something unsettling, why their presence is not recorded clearly. Because they were no longer obvious. They were hidden among humanity. Imagine that. Not giants towering over cities, but something walking quietly among people. Something that looks human, but carries a different nature, a different origin, a different purpose. There is a chilling pattern found in ancient texts, moments where entire nations fall into sudden corruption, where leaders make decisions that seem irrational, destructive, almost as if guided by something unseen, where entire populations are drawn into chaos without understanding why. Could it be coincidence, or could it be influence? The male Nephilim destroyed openly, but the female Nephilim, if they existed as the fragments suggest, may have mastered something far more enduring. The ability to shape the course of humanity without being seen. There are legends of women who possessed unnatural knowledge, who spoke truths that should not have been known, who carried an aura that unsettled even the strongest men. Some were worshipped, others were feared. Many were misunderstood, but few were forgotten, because even in their absence, their impact remained. The ancient world was not blind. It recorded what it could, but it also hid what it feared. And the deeper you go into these texts, the more you begin to realize there are layers, stories within stories, truths buried beneath metaphor, and perhaps entire beings removed from the narrative entirely. Not because they didn't exist, but because acknowledging them would change everything. Think about it. If such beings existed and survived, then the world we live in is not as simple as it appears. The struggle between good and evil is not just external, it is internal, subtle, influenced by forces we do not fully understand. And that brings us to a deeper question. What was their purpose? Why would such beings exist at all? The Watchers rebelled, that much is clear. They sought to alter creation, to corrupt it, to reshape it into something else. The Nephilim were the result, but perhaps the male giants were not the final goal. Perhaps they were just the beginning, an experiment, a first attempt, too obvious, too destructive, too easy to eliminate. But the female lineage, that would be different. That would be refined, subtle, adaptive, capable of surviving where brute force could not, capable of influencing generations, of shaping bloodlines, of embedding themselves into the fabric of humanity. And if that is true, then their story did not end with the flood. It evolved. There is a reason why certain stories have been lost, why certain texts are labeled as apocryphal, dismissed, ignored, because they contain fragments of something that does not fit neatly into accepted narratives, something that challenges the simplicity of what we believe. The Book of Enoch was never meant to be comfortable. It reveals things that raise more questions than answers. It speaks of beings that should not exist, of events that defy understanding, and of consequences that still echo today, but even it remains incomplete. There are gaps, silences, moments where the story feels interrupted, as if something was deliberately removed. And within those gaps, the question lingers. What happened to the female Nephilim? Were they destroyed, hidden, transformed, or are they still here, unseen, unrecognized, yet still influencing the world in ways we cannot fully comprehend? Because if history has taught us anything, it is that the most powerful forces are not always the ones we can see. Sometimes they are the ones that move in silence, that shape events without revealing themselves, that guide outcomes while remaining invisible. And perhaps that is the most unsettling possibility of all, that the story of the Nephilim was never truly about giants, but about influence, about corruption, about the quiet reshaping of humanity over time. And if that is the case, then the real question is not where the female Nephilim went. The real question is, how close are they now? And would we even recognize them if they were standing right in front of us?